Okay, hello and welcome to Teach Online TV. My name is Tyler Basu, and today I'm joined by Julia Wojnar, who is the founder of Unleash Your Presence, and she works with entrepreneurs to help them rock their speaking engagements, everything from getting speaking engagements, crafting their presentations, mistakes to avoid, all that kind of stuff. And today we're going to be diving into the topic of creating a presentation that you can go out and give at a seminar, at a meetup, at a conferences, maybe even on a webinar, and do so in a way that shares some of your expertise, but also gets people to want to work with you and want to buy your online courses. So, Julia, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I'm excited to dive into this with you.
Me too. Thank you for having me.
Now, I know I gave away a little bit of your expertise there, but could you tell us how you got into this in the first place? I know you've been doing this for over 15 years. So how has your business kind of evolved? Why did you decide to work with entrepreneurs and to help them get into speaking in the first place?
Absolutely. Well, the beginning of it actually started when I was starting my business and really thinking about, some of my mentors had sort of taught me this framework of teaching folks, a combination of where your skills and passions are, as well as what the market needs. And for myself, I knew that based on my own experiences with speaking, I've been actually doing performing and theater and speaking really my whole life since I was very young, and have a background in communications as well. So I thought that was really something that I could contribute and help people with. And I'm sure no matter what kind of industry you're in or no matter what you're doing, speaking and communication is always a part of it. And so I thought that was a way that I could really help folks with such a skill that is so important, but is really so difficult for people to actually master.
Right. Okay. And over the last few years, you've kind of chosen to focus on helping entrepreneurs, I guess. So what type of entrepreneur are these? Like authors, coaches, consultants, or any kind of a business owner? In your experience, just what type of entrepreneurs stand to benefit the most from going out and doing public speaking?
Absolutely. Yeah. And like I said, I think that it's a skill that applies in so many different industries. So if I look at the clients that I've worked with, they really range from everything from yoga instructors to business coaches to engineers and people in the technology field. So it's really spanned across all different kinds of industries. But a lot of my clients are either doing things like workshops, whether that's in person or online through webinars, to really share their expertise and to actually sell their services and their programs. So in so many different arenas, I think that skill comes into play. And I personally love working with entrepreneurs because being an entrepreneur myself, we have that in common. We sort of know what's involved. And I think to everybody else who doesn't run their own business, it can be a little bit different.
Yeah, just a little bit of a different mindset, I suppose.
Exactly.
Now, as you know, Thinkific's audience and customers are people who are creating online courses. And so they definitely have, an area of expertise because they created a course on whatever it is that they know. But they're not necessarily professional speakers. They may not have background in professional speaking or communications or marketing or any of those things. And so usually the next step for them is spreading the word about their online course. If they've created a course, but nobody knows about it yet, then they got to get out there and start promoting the course, right?
Absolutely.
And we've talked about this on the show before about, the importance of public speaking, going out there and speaking at events and so on. But what I'd really like to do with you is to dive deeper into how do we actually, how do we think of what we're going to say? Like, how do we make our presentation? How do we come up with our content? If you could provide some structure around that.
Yes. So definitely, I think the first thing, as you mentioned, is of course thinking about if you're, say, doing an online course, who your audience really is. Who is your course for, and who's the type of audience that you want to get in front of. And that's the first thing that I tell people to think about when they're, considering who who they want to speak for is really who's your audience and who would be your potential buyers for that course. And those are the folks that you want to try to target and to get in front of. And when you're actually thinking about structuring that talk, there's really 3 phases that I talk about in terms of structuring any presentation. And I go a little bit further into this in the training that I know we'll talk about later. But those 3 phases essentially are what I call the discovery phase, the writing phase, and then the delivery phase. So anytime you're preparing a talk, you have to start with really discovering what the big idea of that is and what's the main message that you want to get across, and then taking that message and actually structuring it into a way that makes sense, that gets your message across clearly, and then obviously delivering that in a way that is engaging and exciting to people.
Okay, awesome. Now, I definitely want to get into each of those steps in a moment here, but I'm really glad you brought up the importance of knowing your target audience,
Right.
because that immediately is going to eliminate a bunch of events, a bunch of conferences, seminars, whatever places where you could speak, where it just wouldn't make sense for you to speak there, because you wouldn't be speaking to the right people, I suppose. So.
Right.
This is a really important marketing lesson, of course, and a branding lesson is to know who your target audience is, and to make sure you're creating content, you're giving presentations, you're adding value to that audience, and not trying to attract everyone, not trying to be everything to everybody, but really hone in on who it is that you want to serve. So I'm glad you brought up that point. So if somebody has a course, they know who their specific target audience is. Maybe before we get into actually creating our presentation, do you have any tips on how we can find, where our target audience is, or, what events they might be at, or how to get in touch with the hosts of events? Just ways to find opportunities for us to speak in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I know it sounds really simple, but the first thing I just suggest to people is to start with Google, because it's just when you're at the very beginning, it can kind of get your wheels turning, and really searching for, I think, depending on your industry or your particular the particular audience you're looking for, things like industry associations are a great place to try to go speak, or even just looking at, if you're in a city in your local area, places like maybe even a chamber of commerce, or if there are conferences hosted at, maybe if you happen to be located closer to some kind of a conference center, they'll be putting on conferences regularly. So you can actually go and oftentimes just see right in their calendar what's happening, and really figure out, what sort of things make the most sense for you. And it doesn't have to be super complicated. Like I said, you can start even locally so that there's, not too much of a travel commitment, and see what kind of events are happening in your area. And even I think things like meetups are a really great place just to start. And I know for some of my clients, they had a lot of fear about just putting themselves out there in the first place. So they felt a lot more comfortable just speaking at a smaller meetup to start, and to really craft what they're going to present on once they get to the point where they're in front of a broader and larger audience.
Yeah, that's a good point. Start small and work your way up, right? Stepping stones.
Exactly.
So let's say we've got, we've got some events, or we know where we can go and speak, and maybe we've even reached out to the host and we said, hey, this is my area of expertise. If you're a group of people are interested in this, I can come and give a presentation. And let's say they say yes, and now we got to make our presentation. What if we don't have a presentation yet? So can you take us back to that first step in your process, the discovery step, and then just kind of elaborate on that. What do we do in that phase?
Yeah, and this is actually something that a lot of my clients go through. I would say one of the biggest issues that I see when I work with clients is that they've just booked something, and so that step number one is taken care of, and now they have to figure out what they're gonna talk about. And really, I would say that discovery phase is all about honing in on that one big idea. So what I do with clients is actually take them through a process of really brainstorming and figuring out what the core of their message is. So that's really an exercise in narrowing down between all the different ideas or topics that they could talk about. What is really that one idea that represents the core of their message and really what they're all about? And a key part of that is figuring out, if your audience could only walk away with one key takeaway from your talk, what they would want that to be. And that sort of gives them a guiding light into what that big idea is. Because I think, for a lot of folks, if you have a certain amount of experience, there are plenty of topics you could talk about perhaps, but it's really narrowing that down to what do you want to be known for and what is the core of your message in particular.
Right. Okay. So we want to come up with our one big idea before we create the our bullet points, our slides, or whatever our content's going to be. Work backwards from that one big idea, and that applies to any length of presentation. Like, let's say we only get 10 minutes to present to a group, or 30 minutes or 60 minutes. Regardless of how much time we get with them, we should still follow that framework of have one big takeaway from that presentation for the audience.
Absolutely. And I think, that's the key thing for really any type of presentation you do, but it may be even more critical with shorter presentations, because I know I was just asked to do a video for a particular group, and my time frame was only 5 minutes. So in 5 minutes, I'm sure that goes by in the blink of an eye. So you really have to know, in a very short amount of time, what is that core message that you're getting across? And then everything kind of flows from there, because as you're expanding out and really developing the content, knowing what that one big idea is will inform what needs to go into that, as well as what you can leave out of it.
Right. No, that definitely makes a lot of sense. And I've been to, several conferences, and I've had the privilege of seeing a lot of great speakers. But I remember one conference in particular, there was a big name speaker, best-selling author. He had a whole hour to present on stage. And he shared a lot of stuff. And then I went up to him afterwards just to say hi. And I remember him asking, "What did you think of my presentation?" And I felt kind of bad because I couldn't identify that one takeaway that me sitting in the audience would have liked to have had. And I didn't want to tell him that. I didn't want to give him that feedback. So I just said, it was great. But perhaps a lot of other people felt that way as well, is that if we give you our undivided attention as members of the audience for whatever amount of time you're on stage for, we really do want to be able to take action on the information you give us, right? We want that takeaway. We want that next step. We want that one big idea. And so not having that, I think, is kind of a disservice in a way to an audience when you're speaking.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like I said, that's the first thing that I tackle with clients, because so often I find that, they're smart folks. They have lots of things they could talk about, but if the audience is confused and ends up in the situation that you found yourself in, where you don't really know what the point is at the end of the day, then you don't want to leave them feeling disappointed that they just wasted their time.
Right. So so moving into the next step, which is writing, or we might call that, content creation, or because there are different types of presentations we could give. We could give a webinar, we could give, a slideshow presentation, we could give a talk where it's all verbal. But regardless, we need some content. Regardless of which type of presentation it is, we need the content. So working from, we've got one big idea as our starting point. How do we dissect that idea or break it up into a presentation that can keep people compelled, keep them paying attention, and that, gets our message across?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the next part of that I talk about as well with clients in my full program is giving some structure to your talk. So now you've got your big idea, and you want to think about how do you structure that in a way that really gets the point across and also makes sense. So there's actually a few different frameworks that I teach clients, and we probably don't have time to dig into all of them now, but I could name off a couple of them for you, which I'm sure you would recognize. And once you hear it, it actually sounds like some of them are very simple, but it really just gives you a way to put all of your content into a structure so that people really remember it and so that everything flows. So, for example, a lot of books use these structures as well, and even movies. One of those could be the problem solution framework, just to name one example. So I'm sure you've read any kind of book or seen a movie where they're presenting, here's the problem and then here's the solution. And basically throughout the entire course of the content, they're educating you on that solution and why it's the best fit for that problem. And so if you're, presenting on a topic like that and you want to show people what your solution to your particular problem is, that's a really easy framework to just follow, so that it makes sense and people will be able to get that clear takeaway at the end.
Okay, so problem and solution. Are you able to mention like a couple of other frameworks as well?
Yeah. So another one is compare contrast, and one of the books that always comes to mind when I think of that one is Jim Collins' book Good to Great. So in that book, he uses the case studies of different companies to compare the good companies to the really great ones, and uses those stories to illuminate, what makes a company great versus all of the good ones. And so that's another easy framework to just look at if you're utilizing case studies or trying to highlight the difference between different things. Putting it into that framework might make sense for just as another example.
Okay, cool. We actually, as a team, have been reading that book, Good to Great. Actually, no, we've been reading Great by choice, but same author, just the more recent one. But again, filled with research, filled with stories. That actually brings me to my next question, because course creators especially have a lot of how-to content. Step by step, here's how I'm going to teach you how to do this, and here's the steps involved type of content. What are your thoughts on incorporating stories into the presentation so that it's not just all, how to, here's step one, here's step two, but backing it up with examples, backing it up with the stories? Do you think that helps a presentation, or to what extent should we include, stories and examples in when we're trying to teach a concept, I suppose?
Absolutely. I personally think that stories are the best way to give examples of how to do something or to illuminate different points, because people really remember stories and resonate with those. And I'll share a story in particular of one client I worked with. His name was Mark. And Mark had transitioned to being a business coach and still is doing workshops teaching about how to succeed in business, which lots of people were interested in, and were interested in hearing his perspective as well, from having grown 2 successful businesses himself. But one thing that we really dove into quite a bit was his storytelling, because at the beginning of our work together, he said, Julia, I know that I know my content and that's what people are coming to me for. But when I presented, I'm just feeling a disconnect, and I can see that people aren't really engaged in what I'm presenting. And I think it's just coming off a little dry. And I would liken his presence when we first started working to sort of that college professor. If you ever think of, if you've been in a big college class where the professor's sort of lecturing at you and just talking to you without really engaging the audience, that's sort of the presence that he had initially. And so what we helped him to do was actually to bring in more of his own story and experiences as a business owner as a way to teach the different lessons that he had. So one thing that did was it initially just got people interested in what he was teaching anyway, because, a lot of the concepts are pretty universal, but the particular experiences that he had are unique to him. And those are reasons why someone would choose to learn from him, perhaps over someone else. And then, once he'd gotten his audience's attention that way, he could actually use those different stories of perhaps the failures that he had or the lessons he learned as a way to teach the audience as well. So without really hammering the hammering the nail over the head, as it were, in just talking at them about those issues. It really got them involved in a story that he had, and almost taught them what to do through the power of story, rather than just kind of laying out all the points in a more of a dry way.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. So your third step in the process was delivery. So can you walk us through what you mean by that, and just some tips around delivering a presentation?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's another piece that I think I draw upon actually my own background in theater and the performing arts in this delivery phase, because I think a lot of folks do have great things to say, but they may not know how to deliver that in a way that's engaging, or how to really utilize what I call almost those secrets of stagecraft. If you see a really great performance by, maybe a musician or a comedian, they have a way of really engaging the audience and getting them interested in what they're doing. And I think that speakers can also have a great presence. If you see a really great speaker, I'm sure that you've witnessed that. But a lot of people just don't have that training unless they happen to have had that in their background. So it's something that that I teach, how you can, through the rehearsal of your talk, how you can incorporate some of those different elements of stagecraft to make it more engaging and really bring the audience into what you're saying.
Right. And do you have like a recommended like structure or template, like as far as breaking up a presentation into different sections? Like hypothetically, let's say you have 60 minutes with a group. Like how much of that should be, introducing yourself and maybe your story a little bit? How much of it should be your main content? And then how much of it should be more sales oriented, like especially if you've got something to sell or a solution to offer the audience at the end of your presentation? How much of the presentation should be focused on presenting that solution or that course or whatever you've got? Do you have like a certain guidelines for how much time to allocate to those different parts of a presentation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can vary a little bit depending on, how in depth or how many different points you have to your particular content. But in that discovery phase, I think part of that is really considering what the goal is in the first place. So if you are giving more of a sales type of presentation versus, perhaps coming in to give an inspirational sort of keynote, then those are going to have two different goals. So starting with that initial goal, for instance, taking the sales example, if the point of your talk is to sell a product at the end, then really all of the content would be geared towards that sale. So essentially all of the content would support why the audience should buy that product, or why it, what the benefits are for them, why it helps them. So, and that same kind of theme applies for an inspirational talk as well. The key difference there would just be maybe that the goal wouldn't necessarily be sales in that case, but would be why people should support the main message that you have there, or why people should adopt, say, the change that you're proposing.
Right. It's more kind of like selling them an idea.
Exactly.
Versus a
exactly.
product. Right. Either way, they're buying something. They're buying,
right.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Are there any common mistakes that you see people make, as they're going out there and they're sharing their message, they're presenting, whether in person or online? Any mistakes we can avoid?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first one we touched upon a little bit earlier, which is just the lack of not having a clearly defined big idea to begin with. I've seen a lot of speakers just sort of go up, and you can tell that they're thinking through it as they're delivering their talk, and that can wind up getting the message a little confused or lost in translation there.
So practice is important.
Yeah, and that's sort of the other piece that I was going to say is I think a lot of folks don't necessarily put in the time in that rehearsal stage, which I group together in that delivery phase that we talked about, and how important that is, because speaking it's naturally something that makes people nervous to begin with. And, and it can be high stakes depending on if you're, selling something, or if you're going to present at a big conference where, you want to give a good impression. It can be a high stakes situation for sure. So I always encourage people to, in the acknowledgement of that, to realize that, putting in that time in rehearsal beforehand is time well spent, because it'll help you to eliminate a lot of those little mistakes or maybe some of the bad habits before the big day, if you will.
Right. No, that's a really good point. Actually, you just reminded me of, I'm here in Vancouver, and we have TED Talks every year. And
yes.
I know some of the people who got to speak at last year's TED Talk, and I asked them about the rehearsal process. And, these are like, 10-minute presentations that they're giving, like 10, 15-minute tops. And the average preparation time was between the people that I spoke with was 200 and 300 hours to give that one talk. Like rehearsal, practicing on their friends, practicing on their family, getting a public speaking coach to give them feedback for that one presentation. Now, I'm not saying maybe that everybody should go and rehearse for 300 hours every time they get a 10-minute talk. But for TED Talks, perhaps, because that can do, I'm sure, as that can do a lot of great things for your brand to be able to say that you were a TEDx speaker. And these people didn't want to mess that up, so they really rehearsed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one thing that I actually mention in my training is the example of Steve Jobs and the keynotes that he used to give for Apple, because I'm sure a lot of people who've seen videos of those, they know that he was a really engaging speaker. And anytime you'd watch one of those keynotes, he really delivered and really got you excited about the product. But a lot of people don't know that Steve had actually written in some of his early writings that in the beginning of his career, he did not feel that he was very confident as a speaker at all. And so he spent a lot of time rehearsing just by himself in the conference room at the Apple headquarters before the actual keynotes. And part of that was just so that he could feel confident in delivering it. But you could see that a lot of the sort of issues that maybe he was struggling with while he was developing it, he was able to really work out before, it's being recorded and before he's delivering it in front of hundreds of people. So people tend to forget that you see the polished final product, but that didn't come even for great speakers like himself without tons of hours of hard work first.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Great advice. Now, what do you think of in terms of practicing as a speaker and just kind of owning your skills and refining your presentation, refining your message? Because you may not get a large amount of opportunities to go and speak in person at events. You may be limited by the number of events that are relevant to your expertise or your topic, and in your city especially. Not everyone's in a big city where events happen all the time. But what do you think about using things like social media, like Facebook Live, for example, or throwing out some videos on YouTube, or maybe doing a podcast, things like that, just to practice putting content out there and practice sharing your message, practice speaking, and in that environment, in the online environment, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's a great way for people to just get more comfortable with speaking. And one thing that I always do with my clients is in the delivery phase of the process, we're actually going through and rehearsing live what they're going to say. And I have been known at times to pick apart little details of it. But I think the good thing about that is, in working with a coach such as myself, you're able to work through those little issues beforehand. Or if you feel like maybe there's a part of it that you're not really quite sure about or might have some questions about, working with a coach can actually help you to pinpoint those issues. So if you're doing, say, a Facebook Live or going to speak at a meetup, I think that can be great just in terms of giving you more experience and getting comfortable with the audience. But I have had clients who've told me that they did do, talks at meetups just to get that experience, but it was actually through the coaching that they were able to really make the improvements that they needed. Because as a coach, I was able to see, the particular points where they might have been not quite reaching the full point, or how they could make that stronger, and to give them that personalized feedback so that they were able to make those improvements.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Feedback is so important. Feedback is a blessing, even though sometimes it comes as a shock, or but I think it's one of the best things that you can receive, because it gives you a chance to learn and to improve. And the same logic applies to online course creators, because we're telling people all the time, don't try to create the perfect course, especially not the first time, because what you think is perfect, you're going to find out pretty quick the moment you put it out there and you get feedback from people who go through your content that it wasn't actually perfect, and they had, this part here didn't make sense, or that lesson there could have been shorter, this lesson could have been longer. But it's good to get that feedback so you can get better as a content creator, as a teacher, as an entrepreneur.
Absolutely.
Now, I just have one last question for you before we wrap up, because you've been speaking and performing, most of your life, as you mentioned. You've been working with entrepreneurs for several years. You've been sharing your knowledge, as a coach, as a speaker. And our audience is also people who have expertise, and they're out there sharing their knowledge. They're creating courses, they're starting blogs, they're starting podcasts, they're getting their message out there. What kind of an impact would you say that it's had on your life, making that decision to build a business around sharing your expertise with others? And if you have any words of encouragement or anything to inspire somebody who's trying to do that, who's trying to build a business around teaching what they know to other people.
Absolutely. Well, I think much as we talked about it at the beginning of today, I got into really teaching other entrepreneurs about speaking because it was something that I'd been doing and that I realized that I had knowledge about through all the years of performance and speaking that I'd done that a lot of people just didn't have. So there were things that I took for granted that I knew that I could help other people with. And I really actually believe that speaking, whether that's live or that's over video or online, is one of the best things that you can do to spread your message, because you're able to really connect with folks a lot more quickly when you are speaking. And I think, like we said, whether that's online in a course or live in person, there's just so many different ways that speaking comes into play in running a business. And so by being able to master that skill, you can apply it to even doing interviews like we're doing now, or to doing webinars, or to speaking live in person. There's so many different ways that you can apply that skill once you've developed it.
Great advice. Well, Julia, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise and your insights with our audience. Now, you've got resources that I know would be helpful. So if our audience wants to learn more about creating their presentations, becoming better speakers, where is the best place that we can send them to take advantage of those resources that you've got?
Absolutely. And thank you for the opportunity. I've actually put out a full video at the website fearlessspeakertraining.com, where people can go and access for free much more in-depth training that I put together on how to craft and deliver the perfect talk for you to really wow your audience and grow your authority and grow your business. And so if folks are really interested in learning what those steps are to structuring that talk and how to deliver it well, there's a whole in-depth training there that you can access completely for free. Just visit fearlessspeakertraining.com.
Perfect. Well, I'll make sure I link to that below the video so that they can find that easily. And again, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you.